The clock on the dashboard read 10:15 p.m. when Maya finally pulled out of the office parking lot. It had been one of those days that just wouldn't end. Client revisions, last-minute changes, and a presentation that needed to be perfect by morning. She was exhausted. The kind of tired that makes your shoulders ache and your eyes heavy. All she wanted was to get home, kick off her heels, and maybe watch something mindless on TV before passing out. The roads were quiet at this hour. Most people were already home with their families, settled in for the night. Maya turned onto Riverside Drive, a stretch of road she'd driven hundreds of times before. Streetlights cast orange pools of light every 50 feet or so, but between them the darkness felt thick and complete. Trees lined both sides of the road, their branches reaching overhead like they were trying to touch each other. She wasn't speeding. Maya was always careful about that, especially at night. Her father had drilled it into her head since she was 16. Nothing good happens when you give them a reason to pull you over, he'd say. She kept her car maintained, her registration current, everything by the book. That's why her heart sank when she saw the red and blue lights flash in her rearview mirror. For a second, she thought maybe the police car was going somewhere else, responding to a call. But no, it stayed right behind her, and the short whoop of the siren confirmed what she already knew. She was being pulled over. Maya's mind raced through possibilities. Had she rolled through a stop sign? Was her taillight out? She couldn't think of anything she'd done wrong. She pulled over to the shoulder, her tires crunching on gravel. Her hands were shaking slightly as she put the car in park and turned off the engine. She'd been pulled over once before, years ago, for an expired registration sticker she'd genuinely forgotten about. That had been during the day on a busy street, and the officer had been professional and quick. This felt different somehow. The emptiness of the road, the darkness pressing in from all sides, the way her headlights illuminated nothing but empty pavement ahead. Maya rolled down her window and placed both hands on the steering wheel where they could be seen. She'd watched enough news to know that was important. Her phone was in her purse on the passenger seat. She thought about reaching for it, but decided against it. Don't make any sudden movements. Just be polite and cooperative, and this would be over in 5 minutes. The officer took his time approaching. She could see his silhouette in her side mirror, but she couldn't make out his face. When he finally reached her window, he bent down to look at her, and Maya felt a chill run down her spine that had nothing to do with the cool night air. He was maybe in his early 30s, with a clean-shaven face and light-colored eyes that lingered on her just a bit too long before he spoke. "Evening," he said, his voice casual, almost friendly. "License and registration, please." "Of course, officer," Maya replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "Can I ask what I did wrong?" "Your right taillight is out," he said, though there was something in his tone that didn't quite match his words. Like he was reading from a script he didn't really believe. Maya's brow furrowed. "I didn't know that. I just had my car serviced last week." She reached carefully for her purse, narrating her movements like she'd heard you were supposed to. "I'm just getting my wallet from my purse here." "Take your time," the officer said, but he didn't step back to give her space. Instead, he leaned against her car door, watching her fumble with her wallet. His nameplate read Officer D. Mason, but she barely registered it. She was too focused on the way he was looking at her, his eyes traveling from her face down to her blouse and back up again. She handed him her license and registration with fingers that trembled slightly. He took them, but instead of going back to his patrol car like officers normally did, he just stood there studying her license with exaggerated attention. "Maya Rodriguez," he read aloud, drawing out her name. "Pretty name. You live over on Westwood Avenue?" "Yes, sir," she said quietly. Something in her gut was screaming that this wasn't normal, wasn't right. She'd never had a police officer comment on her name like that, or mention her address out loud like he was memorizing it. "You're a long way from home," Mason continued, still not moving toward his car. "What are you doing out here so late?" "I work downtown. I'm a graphic designer. I just left the office." "Graphic designer, huh? You must be smart." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Pretty and smart. That's a dangerous combination." Maya's stomach twisted. That wasn't a professional comment. That wasn't how police officers were supposed to talk to people they pulled over. She gripped the steering wheel tighter, her knuckles going white. "Is there a problem with my documents?" she asked, trying to keep the conversation focused on why he'd stopped her. Mason finally straightened up, but he didn't walk away. "Step out of the vehicle, please." "What? Why?" The words came out before she could stop them. His expression hardened slightly. I smell alcohol. I need you to step out of the vehicle so I can conduct a field sobriety test. I haven't been drinking, Maya protested, her voice rising with panic. I've been at work all day. I haven't had anything to drink. Ma'am, I'm not going to ask again. Step out of the vehicle. Maya's mind was spinning. She knew her rights, sort of. She knew she could refuse. But she also knew what happened to people who refused to cooperate with police. She'd seen the videos, read the stories, and here she was, alone on a dark road with no other cars in sight, no witnesses, nothing but trees and shadows. With shaking hands, she unbuckled her seatbelt and opened her door. Mason stepped back to let her out, but not far. As she stood on unsteady legs, her heels sinking slightly into the soft shoulder of the road, she realized just how isolated they were. The nearest house had to be half a mile away. No headlights approached from either direction. It was just her, this officer, and the night. Walk toward the back of my patrol car, Mason instructed, gesturing with her license. Away from the road. That's when real fear flooded through her system. Away from the road meant away from any passing cars that might see them, away from his dashboard camera. She knew enough about police procedures to know that field sobriety tests were usually conducted right there, in front of the patrol car where everything could be recorded. Can't we do it here? She asked, hearing the tremor in her voice and hating it. I said, walk to the back of my patrol car. His voice had gone cold now, authoritative in a way that made it clear this wasn't a request anymore. Maya's legs felt like they might give out beneath her. Every instinct she had was screaming at her to run, to scream, to do something. But she was 24 years old, 5'4", wearing a pencil skirt and heels. He was a police officer with a gun and a badge and all the authority in the world. Who would believe her if she said anything? Who would take her word against his? She walked toward the back of his patrol car, each step feeling like she was walking toward something terrible, something she couldn't take back. The red and blue lights still rotated silently, casting strange shadows that made everything feel surreal, like a nightmare she couldn't wake up from. Mason followed close behind her, too close, and when she stopped near the trunk of his car, he moved even closer. The night air felt thick and heavy. Somewhere in the distance, an owl hooted, and Maya Rodriguez, graphic designer, daughter, friend, someone who'd done nothing wrong except drive home from work on a Wednesday night, realized that the person who was supposed to protect her might be the person she needed protection from most. Maya stood behind the patrol car, her heart hammering so hard she could hear it in her ears. The rotating lights painted everything in alternating shades of red and blue, making the whole scene feel unreal. Mason circled around to stand in front of her, and she instinctively took a step back, only to feel the cold metal of his car trunk against her lower back. Let's start with a simple test, he said. But he wasn't pulling out a breathalyzer or asking her to walk a straight line. He was just standing there, blocking her path, his eyes moving over her in a way that made her skin crawl. Follow my finger with your eyes. He raised his hand, but instead of holding up one finger at a professional distance, he brought it closer to her face than necessary. Maya tried to lean back, but there was nowhere to go. She could smell his cologne mixed with coffee breath. The smell would stick with her for weeks after this night. I really haven't been drinking, she said again, her voice barely above a whisper. You can give me a breathalyzer test. I'll take it right now. Mason lowered his hand and took another step closer. The space between them had shrunk 2 inches. You know what I think? He said quietly. I think you're nervous because you know you've been drinking. I think you're worried about what's going to happen when I arrest you. Please, Maya said, tears starting to form in her eyes. I just want to go home. My family is expecting me. They'll be worried if I don't get there soon. It was a lie. She lived alone and her parents were 2 states away, but she hoped that mentioning family would remind him that she was a person, that someone would notice if she didn't make it home. Nobody's expecting you, Mason said, and the way he said it made her blood run cold. It was like he knew she was lying, like he'd been watching her somehow. You work late. You live alone. I read your license, remember? Maya's breathing got faster. She looked past him toward the road, praying for headlights for anyone to drive past and see them. The road remained empty, stretching out in both directions like a dark ribbon with no end. Here's what's going to happen, Mason continued, his voice taking on a tone that was almost conversational, like he was explaining something simple and reasonable. You're going to cooperate with me, and then I'm going to let you go with a warning. No ticket, no arrest, no problems. But if you want to make this difficult, well, I can make things very difficult for you. Do you understand what I'm saying?" Maya understood exactly what he was saying. The implications of his words hit her like physical blows. This wasn't about a taillight or a sobriety test. This had never been about that. She thought about her phone and her purse still in her car, useless to her now. She thought about screaming, but who would hear her out here? "I want to call my lawyer," she managed to say, though her voice shook. Mason laughed, an ugly sound that had no humor in it. "Your lawyer? You think this is a TV show? You think you get a phone call right now?" He shook his head slowly. "Nobody's coming to help you. It's just you and me out here." That's when he reached out and put his hand on her shoulder. Maya flinched at the contact, every muscle in her body going rigid with fear and revulsion. His hand was heavy, possessive, moving from her shoulder toward her collar. Something inside Maya snapped. Maybe it was the years of self-defense classes her father had insisted she take. Maybe it was pure survival instinct. Maybe it was the sudden, crystal-clear realization that if she didn't fight back right now, something terrible was going to happen to her, and nobody would ever know the truth. "Get away from me," she screamed, her voice cracking but loud, echoing across the empty road. She shoved at his chest with both hands, putting all her weight behind it. Mason hadn't expected resistance. He stumbled back a step, surprise flashing across his face before it turned to anger. "Big mistake," he growled. And this time when he moved toward her, there was no pretense of professionalism left. He grabbed both her wrists and pushed her hard against the patrol car, the metal edge of the trunk digging into her back. Maya's fear transformed into something else. Rage mixed with desperation. She wasn't going to make this easy. She wasn't going to be quiet. She screamed again, louder this time, a wordless sound of defiance and terror. She twisted her body, trying to break his grip, and when that didn't work, she brought her knee up as hard as she could. The blow connected, and Mason let out a grunt of pain, his grip on her wrist loosening for just a second. It was all she needed. Maya wrenched herself free and ran. She didn't think about direction or strategy. She just ran, her heels clicking frantically on the pavement, her breath coming in gasps. "Stop!" Mason shouted behind her, and she heard his footsteps following. He was faster than her, his boots making steady, determined sounds on the road. Maya kicked off her heels without breaking stride, the pavement cold and rough under her bare feet. She ran toward the road, away from the trees and darkness, toward the empty stretch of asphalt that was somehow less terrifying than what was behind her. Her mind raced almost as fast as her feet. What was she going to do? Where was she going to go? The nearest house was so far away. Even if she reached it, would they let her in? Would they believe her story? Or would they see a hysterical woman with a police officer in pursuit and assume he was the one telling the truth? She could hear Mason getting closer. He was shouting something, but her heart was pounding so loud she couldn't make out the words. Something about resisting arrest, about making things worse for herself. His voice had that official tone again, like he was already constructing the story he would tell, the report he would file. Maya's lungs burned. She wasn't a runner, and the adrenaline that had fueled her escape was starting to fade into exhaustion. Her feet ached from the rough pavement. She didn't know how much longer she could keep going. Behind her, Mason's footsteps never faltered. He was trained for this, prepared for physical confrontation in a way she never had been. Tears streamed down her face, mixing with sweat. This couldn't be happening. This couldn't be real. She was just a normal person living a normal life. She paid her taxes, followed the rules, respected authority, and now that authority was chasing her down a dark road with intentions that made her stomach turn. She risked a glance over her shoulder and immediately wished she hadn't. Mason was maybe 20 feet behind her, his face twisted with anger and exertion. The gap between them was closing. In seconds he would catch her, and then what? She'd already fought him once. She knew what happened to people who fought with police officers, even when they had good reason. Maya's foot hit a rough patch of pavement and she stumbled, catching herself but losing precious momentum. That half second was almost enough for Mason to reach her. She felt his fingers brush the back of her shirt, and pure terror gave her one more burst of speed. Ahead, she saw a curve in the road. Maybe around that curve there would be a house with lights on. Maybe there would be another car. Maybe there would be something, anything, that could save her from this nightmare. But as she rounded the curve, her heart sank. More empty road. More darkness. More nothing. You're only making this worse, Mason called out, and he didn't even sound that winded. When I catch you, and I will catch you, you're going to face serious charges. Resisting arrest. Assaulting a police officer. You want to go to jail? The injustice of it hit Maya almost as hard as the fear. He was already building his case, already preparing to turn this around on her. In his version of events, she would be the criminal. He would be the officer just trying to do his job. His word against hers. His badge against her desperation. She was slowing down. She couldn't help it. Her body was giving out, her legs feeling like lead, her breath coming in ragged gasps that hurt her chest. Mason was going to catch her. She knew it now with horrible certainty. And when he did, when she couldn't run anymore, when she was too exhausted to fight back, what would happen then? That's when she saw headlights. In the distance, coming around the far curve, a pair of headlights cut through the darkness. Hope surged through Maya's exhausted body. She ran toward those lights like they were salvation itself, waving her arms, preparing to scream for help. But would whoever was driving stop? Would they help a barefoot woman running down the road, chased by what looked like a police officer doing his duty? Or would they assume this was official business and drive right past, leaving her alone with Mason and whatever he planned to do next? The headlights got brighter, closer. Maya could hear Mason behind her, could hear him changing tactics, his voice taking on that official tone again. He was preparing his story for whoever was approaching, ready to explain away whatever they were seeing. Maya's entire future, maybe even her life, came down to the next 30 seconds. To whoever was driving that car, to whether they would stop, whether they would question what they saw, whether they would be someone who actually cared about the truth. She kept running toward those headlights, bare feet bleeding now from the rough pavement, lungs burning, vision blurring with tears and exhaustion. Behind her, Mason shouted something about a suspect fleeing the scene. Ahead of her, the car was slowing down. Everything was about to change one way or another. Chief Catherine Williams had been police chief for 3 years, but she'd been a cop for 22. She knew these roads like she knew the lines on her own hands. Riverside Drive was part of her route home, and she'd driven it thousands of times at all hours in all weather. Tonight she was bone-tired from a day of budget meetings and personnel issues. Looking forward to a hot shower and maybe a glass of wine before bed. She was thinking about nothing in particular when she heard it. A scream. Faint, distant, but unmistakable. Catherine's foot eased off the gas pedal instinctively. She'd been a street cop long enough that certain sounds cut through everything else. A scream was one of them, especially a scream like that, raw with terror and desperation. She slowed further, rolling down her window. The night air rushed in, cool and pine-scented. At first, she heard nothing but the rustle of leaves and the hum of her engine. Then it came again, clearer now. Another scream and the sound of running feet on pavement. Catherine's training kicked in immediately. She accelerated, rounding the curve faster than she normally would, and that's when she saw them. Red and blue lights flashing from a patrol car parked on the shoulder. Empty. And running down the middle of the road, a young woman, barefoot, her dark hair wild, arms waving frantically. Behind her, about 30 feet back, Officer Derek Mason in full pursuit. Catherine's first instinct was to assume she was seeing exactly what it looked like, an officer chasing a suspect. It happened. People ran from cops all the time for all kinds of reasons, but something was off. The woman wasn't running away into the woods or trying to hide. She was running toward Catherine's car, toward help, her face twisted in an expression that spoke of pure terror rather than guilt. And Mason? Catherine had worked with him for 2 years since he'd transferred from another precinct. He was competent enough, never caused problems at the station, but there had been something about him she'd never quite liked, something she couldn't put her finger on, a certain way he talked about women, comments that weren't quite inappropriate enough to report, but that sat wrong in her gut. Catherine made a split-second decision. She activated her own lights, pulled her car across both lanes to create a barrier, and stepped out quickly. "Stop!" she called out, her voice carrying the authority of 2 decades of command. The young woman practically collapsed against the hood of Catherine's car, gasping for breath, barefoot and terrified. Up close, Catherine could see her clothes were disheveled. Her feet were bleeding and tear tracks cut through the makeup on her face. This wasn't someone fleeing justice. This was someone fleeing something else entirely. Mason skidded to a stop about 15 feet away when he saw who had arrived. Catherine watched his face cycle through several expressions in rapid succession. Surprise, concern, then calculation. He was already working out what to say, how to frame this. "Chief Williams," he said, slightly out of breath but recovering his professional demeanor quickly. "Thank God you're here. This woman attacked me during a routine traffic stop and fled the scene. I've been pursuing her for officer safety." Catherine looked down at the young woman who was gripping the hood of her car, like it was the only solid thing in the world. She was trembling so hard Catherine could see it even in the rotating blue and red lights. Whatever had happened here, the woman was genuinely terrified. "Is that true?" Catherine asked her gently, crouching down to meet her eyes. The woman looked up and Catherine saw something in her face that she'd seen too many times in her career. The look of someone who just survived something they shouldn't have had to survive. The look of someone who wasn't sure if they'd be believed. He tried to... The woman started, then her voice broke. She was shaking her head, tears flowing freely now. "I didn't do anything wrong. I was just driving home from work. He pulled me over and said my taillight was out, but then he started saying things. Inappropriate things. He made me get out of the car, made me go behind his patrol car where the camera couldn't see, and then She couldn't finish, but she didn't need to. Catherine's jaw tightened. She stood up slowly, her eyes moving from the woman to Mason, then back to the empty patrol car in the distance. "Officer Mason," Catherine said, her voice carefully neutral. "Where exactly did this traffic stop take place?" "Right there, Chief," Mason said, pointing back toward his patrol car. "Behind my vehicle. I was conducting a field sobriety test." "Behind your vehicle," Catherine repeated. "Not in front, where your dashboard camera would record it." Mason's expression flickered for just a second. The lighting was better in the back. "I needed to conduct a proper assessment." Catherine had conducted thousands of field sobriety tests in her career. Not once had she done it behind her vehicle, away from her camera in the dark. Every police officer knew you documented everything, unless you specifically didn't want something documented. "Why did you suspect she'd been drinking?" Catherine asked. "I smelled alcohol," Mason said without hesitation, but Catherine noticed he wouldn't quite meet her eyes. Catherine looked back at the young woman. She was still trembling, still gripping the car, but she was watching this exchange with desperate hope in her eyes. "Ma'am, have you had anything to drink tonight?" "No," the woman said firmly. "Nothing. I was working late. I'm a graphic designer. I left my office around 10 and was just driving home. That's all I was doing. Just driving home." There was something about the simple truth in those words that hit Catherine hard. Just driving home. Such an ordinary thing. Something everyone should be able to do without fear. "Chief, she's obviously going to deny it," Mason interjected, taking a step forward. Catherine held up her hand, stopping him. "Stay where you are, officer." Her tone had changed now, harder, leaving no room for argument. She pulled out her phone and called for backup. "This is Chief Williams. I need 2 units to Riverside Drive, approximately 2 miles east of Pinewood intersection. And I need someone from Internal Affairs." "Chief, that's not necessary," Mason said. And now there was an edge of panic in his voice. "This is just a misunderstanding. The suspect is clearly distraught and confused. She has a name, I'm sure," Catherine said coldly. She turned to the young woman. "What's your name, honey?" Maya Rodriguez." "Maya, I'm Chief Catherine Williams. You're safe now, okay? Nobody's going to hurt you. I need you to tell me exactly what happened from the beginning." And Maya did. Between gasps and tears, she told the whole story. The traffic stop, the inappropriate comments, being forced to go behind the patrol car, Mason's threats, his hands on her, his intentions made horrifyingly clear. She told Catherine how she'd fought back, how she'd run, how certain she was that he would catch her, and that no one would believe her word against a police officer's. Catherine listened to every word, her expression growing darker with each detail. She'd been in law enforcement long enough to know when someone was telling the truth. And she'd been around long enough to know that sometimes the monsters wore badges. When backup arrived 3 minutes later, Catherine made sure it was all documented properly. She had the officer secure Mason, who was now loudly protesting his innocence and threatening to call his union rep. She had them photograph Maya's injuries, her bleeding feet, her disheveled appearance. She had them retrieve Maya's shoes from the road where she'd kicked them off while running for her life. "I want Mason's body camera footage," Catherine ordered one of the officers, "and his dash cam. Everything from tonight." "Chief, my body camera malfunctioned," Mason said quickly, too quickly. "Technical issues. It's been happening all week, is that so? Catherine walked over to him, and even though he was taller than her, he seemed to shrink under her gaze. Funny how these technical issues always seem to happen at convenient times. She turned to the other officer.
Get that footage anyway.
And check the logs to see how many times his camera has mysteriously malfunctioned in the past 6 months. While her officers worked, Catherine stayed with Maya, getting her statement, making sure she knew she was protected. You did everything right, Catherine told her. You fought back. You ran. You survived. And you're going to get justice, I promise you that. Will I, though? Maya asked, her voice small. He's a police officer. I'm nobody. Who's going to believe me? Catherine knelt down in front of her again, looking her directly in the eyes. I believe you. And I'm the chief of police, which means I have the authority to make sure this gets investigated properly. You're not nobody, Maya. You're someone who deserves to be safe, and I'm going to make sure everyone involved in this case understands that. An ambulance arrived to check Maya over and treat her feet. While the paramedics worked, Catherine stood a few feet away watching Mason being placed in handcuffs. He was still protesting, still claiming this was all a misunderstanding, still trying to maintain his innocence. But Catherine saw through it all. She'd seen too many cases like this in her career. Cases that got swept under the rug because it was easier to protect the department's reputation than to protect the victim. But not this time. Not on her watch. She'd spent 22 years building her career, earning respect, climbing the ranks, and she hadn't done all that to stand by while one of her officers abused his authority and terrorized innocent people. If the department had a problem with how she handled this, they could take her badge. She'd rather lose her job than lose her integrity. As they loaded Mason into one of the patrol cars, he locked eyes with Catherine one last time. There was anger there and resentment, but also fear. He knew what she knew. His career was over. More than that, he was facing serious criminal charges. And unlike his previous victims, if there were any, Maya had someone in her corner who had the power to make sure justice was served. Catherine turned back to Maya, who was being loaded into the ambulance. I'm going to follow you to the hospital, she told her. And then I'm going to personally make sure your statement is recorded properly. After that, I'm going to start digging into Officer Mason's history, because I have a feeling you're not the first woman he's done this to. Maya's eyes widened. You think there were others? I think men like him don't usually start with what he tried tonight, Catherine said grimly. I think he's been building up to this, and I think if we look hard enough, we're going to find complaints that were ignored or buried. As the ambulance pulled away with Maya inside, Catherine stood on that dark road, surrounded by flashing lights and her officers going about their work. She thought about how close this had come to being a very different kind of scene. If she'd driven a different route home, if she'd been 5 minutes later, if Maya hadn't been strong enough to fight and run, but she had been there. Maya had been strong. And now, for the first time in what Catherine suspected was a long history of abuse and cover-ups, Derek Mason was going to face real consequences. She got in her car and followed the ambulance toward the hospital, already planning her next moves. This was going to get ugly. The police union would fight back. There would be pressure from higher-ups to handle this quietly. Some officers would close ranks, protecting their own. But Catherine Williams had spent her entire career preparing for moments like this. Moments when doing the right thing meant standing alone against the people who were supposed to be on her side. She'd do it because that's what justice demanded, and because somewhere out there might be other women who'd been too afraid to come forward. Women who needed to know that someone in power actually cared about the truth. The night was far from over. In many ways, it was just beginning. The hospital waiting room smelled like antiseptic and bad coffee. Catherine sat in one of the uncomfortable plastic chairs, her mind already working through the case while Maya was being examined by doctors. She'd sent one of her officers to retrieve Maya's car and belongings, and another to start pulling every piece of documentation related to Officer Derek Mason's employment history. Around 2 a.m., a nurse finally came out to tell Catherine that Maya was ready to give her statement. The young woman looked exhausted, wrapped in a hospital blanket with bandages on her feet. But there was something different in her eyes now. The terror had faded, replaced by determination. Catherine pulled out her recorder and notebook. Before we start, I want to explain how this is going to work. I'm going to take your statement tonight while everything is fresh. Then we're going to involve the district attorney's office. This isn't just an internal investigation, Maya. This is a criminal case. Do you understand? Maya nodded slowly. You really think charges will stick? Against a police officer? I'm going to make sure they do, Catherine replied. But I need to be honest with you. This is going to be hard. His lawyers will try to discredit you. They'll dig into your past, your social media, everything. They'll try to make you look unreliable. Are you prepared for that? Maya was quiet for a moment, staring down at her bandaged feet. A few hours ago, I thought I was going to die on that road. Or worse, so yeah, I can handle some lawyers asking me questions. I just want to make sure he can't do this to anyone else. Catherine spent the next 2 hours taking Maya's statement, documenting every detail. She took photos of the bruises forming on Maya's wrists where Mason had grabbed her, the cuts on her feet from running barefoot on rough pavement, the torn button on her blouse. Every piece of evidence mattered. When they finished, Catherine arranged for Maya's parents to be contacted and for her to stay at a hotel for the night, paid for by the Victim Assistance Fund. I don't want you going home alone tonight, Catherine explained. And we'll have an officer check your apartment before you return just to be safe. You think he knows where I live? Maya asked, fear creeping back into her voice. He had your license. Better safe than sorry. Catherine squeezed her shoulder gently. Get some rest. I'll call you tomorrow with updates, but Catherine didn't rest. As the sun came up over the city, she was in her office going through files. What she found made her blood boil. Derek Mason had transferred to their department 2 years ago from a precinct 3 counties over. His file looked clean, professional commendations, no complaints. But Catherine had learned long ago that clean files sometimes meant buried problems, not no problems. She picked up her phone and called an old friend, Captain Helen Morris from Mason's previous department. Helen, it's Catherine Williams. Sorry to call so early, but I need to ask you about an officer who used to work for you, Derek Mason. There was a long pause on the other end. Too long. What did he do? The question itself was telling. Not is he okay? Or what about him? But what did he do? Like Helen had been waiting for this call. Attempted sexual assault during a traffic stop. Young woman alone on a dark road. He pulled her over on a bogus charge and tried to force himself on her. She fought back and ran. I happened to be driving by. Jesus, Helen breathed. We suspected, but we could never prove anything. 2 women filed complaints while he was here. Both withdrew them within a week. No evidence, no witnesses, their word against his. The department encouraged them to drop it rather than pursue claims they couldn't substantiate. Catherine's grip tightened on the phone. Encouraged them to drop it. Or pressured them. Look, I wanted to push harder on those cases, but I was a sergeant back then. My lieutenant said it would damage department morale to investigate without solid evidence. Mason was never officially disciplined. When he requested a transfer, the higher-ups were actually relieved. Easier to let him be someone else's problem than deal with the mess of a formal investigation. Do you remember the women's names? Helen gave her the information, and Catherine added it to her growing file. 2 victims that she knew of now, not counting Maya. And those were just the ones who'd been brave enough to come forward. How many others had there been? How many women had Mason pulled over on lonely roads, knowing his badge gave him power and immunity? By noon, Catherine had tracked down both women from Mason's previous department. The first, Jennifer, agreed to talk but didn't want to be involved in any official capacity. I tried to get justice once, she said over the phone, her voice weary. Nobody believed me. They made me feel like I was the one who'd done something wrong. I can't go through that again. Catherine understood, though it frustrated her. Would you be willing to give me an unofficial statement? Just so I have a record of what happened to you? Jennifer agreed to that much. Her story was eerily similar to Maya's. Traffic stop on a dark road, inappropriate behavior, Mason forcing her behind his patrol car. But Jennifer had frozen up, too terrified to fight or run. What Mason had done to her had been completed before she found the courage to scream. Afterwards, she'd reported it immediately, still in shock, still shaking. And the department had treated her like she was the problem. They asked me what I was wearing, Jennifer said quietly. They asked if I'd been flirting with him during the stop. They asked if I had any mental health issues. By the time they were done questioning me, I felt like I was the one on trial. The second woman, Alicia, was angrier. I knew nobody would help me, she said when Catherine reached her. I filed the report because I thought I had to. But when they started asking me all those questions, when they made it clear they thought I was lying, I withdrew it. What was the point? His word against mine, and he had a badge. His word isn't going to be enough this time, Catherine told her. I saw what happened with my own eyes. I have a victim who fought back and has visible injuries. I have his patrol car footage and evidence that he deliberately positioned the victim outside his body camera's range. And now I have your testimony that shows a pattern of behavior. You really think you can make something stick? Alicia asked, skepticism heavy in her voice. I'm going to try, but I need your help. Both of you. I need you to make official statements. There was silence on the line for a long moment. Then Alicia said, if I do this, if I come forward again, you have to promise me something. You have to promise you'll actually follow through, that you won't let them bury this like they buried it before. I promise, Catherine said, and she meant it with everything she had. Over the next few days, Catherine built her case methodically. She pulled Mason's dashcam footage, which showed him stopping Maya but conveniently cut off before he approached her vehicle. His body camera, which he'd claimed malfunctioned, showed a different story. The technical logs revealed he'd manually turned it off, something officers were only supposed to do during breaks or personal time, never during an active stop. She interviewed the officers who worked most closely with Mason. Most of them claimed they'd never seen anything inappropriate, but a few admitted they'd heard him make comments about women he'd pulled over. Just talk, one officer said uncomfortably. Guys being guys. We didn't think he'd actually do anything. Catherine called a meeting with the district attorney, Robert Chen, a sharp prosecutor who'd worked with her on several cases. She laid out everything she had: Maya's testimony, the physical evidence, the prior complaints, the pattern of behavior. This is solid, Robert said, reviewing the file. We can charge him with attempted sexual assault, abuse of authority, civil rights violations. The pattern evidence from the previous victims makes it even stronger. But you know what his defense is going to be? That Maya is lying. That she attacked him and he was just trying to restrain her. That I'm biased because I want to make the department look tough on misconduct. Catherine leaned back in her chair. I know all their plays, Robert. The union is going to fight this hard, Robert warned. Mason will have the best lawyers they can provide. They'll argue that you're throwing one of your own officers under the bus to score political points. Let them argue. I have the evidence. I have witnesses. And I have a victim who's willing to testify. Catherine's jaw set firmly. I've been doing this job for over 20 years, and I've seen too many cases like this get swept under the rug. Not this time. But the pushback came faster and harder than even Catherine expected. The police union called a press conference where they characterized Mason as a dedicated officer, being railroaded by false accusations. 2 city council members questioned whether Catherine was being too hasty in her judgment. Her own deputy chief pulled her aside to suggest that maybe they should wait for the full investigation before pursuing criminal charges. We're not waiting, Catherine told him flatly. Mason is a danger to the community. He abused his authority and tried to assault a woman who trusted that his badge meant she was safe. If we wait, if we give the union time to manufacture doubt, justice won't be served. The worst moment came when someone leaked Maya's identity to the media. Suddenly her face was on the news, her name in articles. Reporters camped outside her apartment. Her social media was flooded with messages, some supportive but many accusing her of lying, of trying to destroy a good officer's career, of being an opportunist looking for a payday. Catherine called her immediately. I'm so sorry. We're investigating how your name got out. That should never have happened. Maya's voice was tired. My boss saw the news. He wants me to take time off until this blows over. My friends keep asking me about it. Random people are sending me messages calling me a liar. She paused. Chief Williams, was I wrong to come forward? Maybe everyone's right. Maybe it would have been easier to just forget it happened. Look at me, Catherine said, even though they were on the phone. You did nothing wrong. Not when you drove home from work that night, not when you fought back, and not when you told the truth about what happened. The people trying to silence you are the ones who are wrong, and we're going to prove it. 3 weeks after that night on Riverside Drive, Catherine sat in her office reviewing everything one more time. She had statements from Maya, from Jennifer, from Alicia. She had the dash cam footage, the body camera logs, the pattern evidence. She had expert testimony about police procedures and why Mason's actions violated every protocol. She had testimony from the hospital staff who'd treated Maya, documenting her injuries and her emotional state. And she had something else. A fourth victim who'd come forward after seeing the news coverage. Lisa worked as a waitress and had been pulled over by Mason 6 months ago. She hadn't reported it because, like the others, she didn't think anyone would believe her, but seeing Maya's courage had given her courage too. 4 victims, Robert said when they met to finalize the charges. 4 women whose stories all match the same pattern. The defense is going to have a hard time claiming they're all lying. They'll still try, Catherine said, but she felt something she hadn't felt in weeks. Hope. Real hope that justice might actually be served. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for the following month. Mason was suspended without pay pending the outcome. His lawyers were already filing motions trying to get evidence thrown out, trying to discredit the victims. But Catherine had built her case carefully, following every rule, documenting everything. She met with Maya the night before the hearing. The young woman looked different now, stronger somehow despite everything she'd been through. "I'm ready," Maya said. "I'm ready to tell my story and make sure he faces consequences." "You're one of the bravest people I've ever met," Catherine told her honestly. "What you're doing, standing up and telling the truth even when it's hard, even when people doubt you, that takes real courage." "I'm just doing what's right," Maya said. "And I know I can do it because you believed me. You didn't question me or blame me. You just believed me and helped me. Every victim deserves that." Catherine thought about all the cases over the years where victims hadn't gotten that. All the times departments had prioritized protecting their officers over protecting the public. All the times justice had been sacrificed for convenience or politics. "You're right," she said. "Every victim does deserve that. And I'm going to spend the rest of my career making sure they get it." The courthouse was packed on the first day of Derek Mason's trial. Media crews lined the steps outside, cameras ready to capture every moment. Inside, Maya sat in the witness room, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Her parents had flown in from Arizona to support her. Her mother held her hand while her father paced the small room, anger and protectiveness radiating from him. "I still can't believe this happened to you," her mother said softly, tears in her eyes. "That someone who's supposed to protect people could do something like this. But she's here now, and she's going to tell her truth," her father added, stopping his pacing to kneel in front of Maya. "And we're going to be right there with you, Mija, every step of the way." Catherine stopped by before proceedings began. "The defense is going to try to rattle you," she warned. "They're going to ask uncomfortable questions and try to make you doubt yourself. Don't let them. Just tell the truth exactly as you told me that night. The jury will see through their tactics." When Maya finally took the stand, the courtroom went quiet. She could see Mason sitting at the defense table in a suit instead of his uniform, looking nothing like the man who'd terrorized her that night. His lawyers had clearly coached him to appear sympathetic, almost vulnerable. But Maya knew what was beneath that carefully constructed image. The prosecutor, Robert Chen, started with gentle questions, letting Maya tell her story in her own words. She described leaving work that night, being pulled over, Mason's inappropriate comments being forced behind the patrol car. Her voice stayed steady even as she described the fear, the realization of what he intended to do the moment she decided to fight back. "Why did you fight back?" Robert asked. Maya looked directly at the jury. "Because I knew if I didn't, something terrible was going to happen to me. And I knew that even if people didn't believe me later, at least I would know that I'd tried, that I hadn't just let it happen." Several jurors nodded slightly. One woman in the front row had tears in her eyes. Then came the cross-examination. Mason's defense attorney, a sharp-faced man named Harold Brennan, approached with calculated confidence. "Ms. Rodriguez, isn't it true that you'd been working late that night and were stressed?" "I was tired from work, yes," Maya replied carefully. "Tired and possibly impaired in your judgment?" Brennan suggested. "I wasn't impaired. I was fully aware of what was happening." "But you admit you were in an emotional state?" Brennan pressed. "Stressed, tired, perhaps prone to misinterpreting normal police procedures?" Maya's jaw tightened. There was nothing normal about what Officer Mason did. Making inappropriate comments about my appearance isn't normal procedure. Forcing me behind his patrol car where cameras couldn't see isn't normal procedure. Putting his hands on me and making his intentions clear isn't normal procedure. "Your Honor," Brennan protested. "The witness is editorializing." "I'm answering your question," Maya said firmly before the judge could respond. "You asked if I misinterpreted normal police procedures. I'm telling you that what happened that night wasn't normal police procedure. It was assault. The exchange set the tone for the rest of the trial. Brennan tried everything, questioning Maya's memory, suggesting she'd somehow provoked Mason, implying she was motivated by money or attention. But Maya didn't waver. Every time he tried to twist her words, she calmly corrected him and restated the truth. When Jennifer took the stand the next day, there were gasps in the courtroom as she described her own experience with Mason. The similarities to Maya's story were impossible to ignore. Brennan tried to suggest the women had coordinated their testimonies, but Robert quickly demolished that theory by showing they'd never met or communicated before coming forward. Alicia's testimony was even more powerful. She'd been carrying the weight of what happened to her for 2 years, and the anger and pain in her voice were palpable. I reported what he did to me, she said, staring directly at Mason, and I was treated like I was the criminal. I was questioned and doubted and made to feel like I'd done something wrong. So I withdrew my complaint because what was the point? But I never forgot, and I never stopped knowing that what he did to me was wrong. Lisa, the 4th victim, testified last. Her experience had happened most recently, just months before Maya's attack. When I saw the news about Maya Rodriguez, Lisa said, I felt sick because I knew it was true. I knew because the same thing had happened to me, and I felt guilty because if I'd reported it, maybe he wouldn't have been able to hurt her. That's not your fault, Robert said gently. The fault lies with the person who committed these acts, and with a system that made it too hard for victims to come forward. The defense tried to paint the 4 women as part of a conspiracy to destroy Mason's career, but the evidence told a different story. 4 women from different backgrounds, different cities, who'd never met each other but whose stories all followed the same pattern, same behavior, same tactics, same abuse of authority. When Chief Catherine Williams took the stand, she testified about what she'd witnessed that night on Riverside Drive. She described Maya's terror, her injuries, her emotional state. She explained how Mason had violated every protocol by turning off his body camera and positioning Maya outside the dashcam's view. In your professional opinion, based on 22 years of experience, Robert asked, were Officer Mason's actions consistent with proper police procedure? No, Catherine said firmly. They were consistent with someone trying to hide what they were doing, someone who knew their actions were wrong and didn't want them documented.